Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted that Nipun has has come and is spending time with all of us today. I've known Nipun for a very long time, and I think instead of doing a very long formal introduction, I would rather you experience Nipun and his wisdom and his love. Just a few words I'll tell you. He had a very successful career in Silicon Valley, which he left, and he and his wife went round India for a year to find themselves, to reach out to others. And his emphasis is love and compassion. And that's what TFI also stands for. So there's a strong connect between us. And he's got many awards, but the one I value for him is the Dalai Lama has given him a very. So, Nipun, carry on.
Thank you, Anu. I think I will have slides. I like slides, but whenever they come on, what I thought I would share is I think the title that I was thinking in my mind was "Educating the Heart in an AI World." I think the real question, I think if we forget about the inner dimensions of our cultivation, of our growth, I think we shortchange ourselves and we lead into very complicated areas. So I had a photo, which may come up eventually, of this woman in a surgery room, getting a brain surgery, playing the violin while her brain is being operated on. And the reason why she did that is because the doctors told her, the doctors told her, I move my arms on them so if
Yeah, I don't want to.
The doctors told her that we don't know what's going to happen in this brain surgery. And if you want to remember after this brain surgery how to play the violin, you have to keep playing it during the surgery. So it's a very compelling visual of your brain opened up and you playing the violin. And I think it's a great metaphor for how we remember our song, how we remember our hearts, how we remember compassion when we are going through what seems like a pretty intense collective surgery of sorts. I was in Austria day before yesterday, and I was speaking at breakfast with this guy, and he told me he's done a lot of work on trauma and healing. And he said something, oh, there it is. Yeah, that's fabulous. Isn't that? Like, I just thought it was a pretty powerful visual of, the doctors actually operating on her while she's playing the violin. So maybe next slide. Oh, there it is. Yes. So I've gone through some of this, but I think we are facing times of intense suffering. In these times of suffering, how do we remember compassion? And both of these go hand in hand. Suffering is what we experience, and compassion is the wish to be free from suffering, not just for ourselves, but for other people. And so maybe what we can do is whenever I look up this way, you can... usually I do the clicker thing. So so this guy I met in Austria, he said something really beautiful at breakfast. He came down, sat next to me. He was one of the speakers. And he said that we don't know how to regulate our nervous systems. And when we don't know, we get easily hijacked. And when we get hijacked, he says we are completely absent from the present moment. So he says there are three stages. He says we are in absence, we are in presence, or we are in regeneration. So absence, he says, I asked him, I said, hey, I'm going to speak with a bunch of educators. What do you think about education? He says, you know what my son says? That my teachers are absent and I miss them. So if your body might be here, my body might be here, but are you present? Am I present? And if we are, a lot more can happen between us. So I click maybe. So the transition between absence and presence I think, is inner work. How do you go from, we have an 8-second attention span. So if I have to package everything in 8 seconds, what would happen if you actually expanded it to 10 seconds and I expanded it to 10 seconds? What would happen in those extra 2 seconds between us? But I have to do that work of moving from 8 seconds to 10 seconds. I can't just be like, okay, next, or this is boring, or this is against my political beliefs. You have to have the inner resources to not do that. And I think where this is interesting, because most of the world is today in social change is burnt out. Everybody, we do well-being work, but we do well-doing, but we don't know well-being. And so what is the collective inner work? You can't just get to regeneration just by your own individual solo meditation retreats. I do solo meditation retreats, so I can tell you about that. So I think this is something to kind of reflect on. And we have designed the world, I would say, for absence. We optimize for absence. And so as you can see here, right, this is traditionally we used to play a sport, now we watch a sport, then we're pretty much now in a dopamine culture, we gamble on a sport, right? You can go down the list. We go from handwritten letters to, voicemail to just text, happy birthday, right? Like, what does it mean? We're just swiping left and right, right? It used to be just TikTok videos, or rather it used to be like you would watch TV, then you're like, oh, YouTube. And then on YouTube, you will also like, and once you say, I will also like, you're just like sucked in, and then Netflix, and then binging on Netflix, and then video games, where you're basically living inside video games, and they're gonna get more and more. So, and this is all compounding absence. It's like, you are absent, it's completely dissatisfying when I'm absent, and if I'm absent, you're absent, and that's dissatisfied, we build on this narrative. I love this, this is usually a gridlock. In India, in non-Indian places, they'd be like, oh, this is a traffic jam. But here you would be like, oh, this is a very nice, nicely behaved road. But we are in what it metaphorically symbolizes is gridlock. And you try to solve one problem, you're creating 5 other problems. So how do we then, this is not a surprise, by the way. This is the CEO of LinkedIn in 2011. He said social networks do best when they tap into one of the 7 deadly sins. Right? I mean, I don't know here if everyone is on LinkedIn, so many places. And he's clearly telling us that Facebook is ego, Zynga, which is a video game company, is sloth, and LinkedIn, my own company, is saying, thank you for being a user. I'm manipulating your greed factor. And I would know because I'm the founder. So I appreciate your loyal usage. So he said, but he's a nice guy. I happened to be at an event recently where he was one of the hosts. And so I said, okay, well, has he said anything else after that? Because this is 2011, right? So, and he did. In 2021, he said, well, look, when we started off, we weren't trying to be like mean or anything. We were trying to get to the wisdom of the crowds. But instead, what we got to was madness of the masses. And next slide. And he says that unless we continuously innovate our incentives and power structures, it's going to be very hard to get to the masses, the well-being of the masses. So this is the world of absence that we have optimized for, saying that I have no faith in your capacity to go from absence to presence, let alone to regeneration. So please come into what they call in the tech world a metaverse, right? So, and this is all moving so fast. It took 68 years for TV to get to 100 million users. So we figured out a balance. How much TV should I watch, right? My parents had a quota. It took 2 months to get to 100 million users for ChatGPT. We have no idea. We don't know how to negotiate this. But it's not optimized for community. It's optimized for absence, where you're totally separate. So I don't even care what my parents think about or what my community thinks, what my teachers think. I'm going to do my own thing because we're completely disconnected. As a result, we're not that resilient. So if this was in 2015. I was invited to an event where they were talking about the future of parenting, and this really scared me. But Yuval Harari had this quote. He says, it's kind of blunt, but he's a big thinker in the AI world. Next slide. I mean, not next click. Says, if we invest too little in developing technology, too much in tech, and too little in human consciousness, what's likely is AI is going to amplify human stupidity, which is essentially absence. Because it's really a shame if you are absent, I'm absent, and we're both dissatisfied, when all we need to do is please be present, let's co-create something far greater. And how do we get there? How do we get there? So I think on one side, that's the end of my tech, okay? I think. Anu was like, don't make it too Silicon Valley-like, okay? All right. I said, I'll try. But the second one, so the first one, they call in tech worlds metaverse, right? This alternate universes. That this is too complicated. You are so complicated. You have so many moods. I'm so complicated. I have so many moods, so many opinions. We can't get along. So let's all escape into a digital world. And that's the metaverse. But there's also the metaverse, right? Which is a Pali word for loving kindness, which is lead with love, that I remember from yesterday's musical. And so this is my personal slide. These are my parents, and that's my brother. And the reason why I put this photo up, because they hadn't hugged like this in 10 years, because my brother was sick. And he needed to be quarantined for all those 10 years. And so they couldn't be in close proximity. But they recently could hug him, and that was really beautiful. My brother, this whole last year, I've spent 7 months, and my wife and I, we moved out of our house to be able to take care of him and his wife, both of whom were struggling with very intense conditions. So for 73 days, I was in the hospital with him. And one of the things I saw, next slide, this is him. This is a better version of that photo. This is my younger brother. One of the things I saw was that he had, so among one of his conditions was he lost his short-term memory for a little bit. And when he did, he could recognize me as his brother, long-term memory, but he didn't know why these people were in the hospital, why he was in the hospital, what's going on. He didn't have a narrative on all of that. And so I was like explaining it to him every time. Every time he has to go to the bathroom, I have to explain the process that he needs to go through, because he wouldn't remember. In this, where he doesn't have any conceptual framework, he is ridiculously and remarkably kind. He would go and he would look and he would say he can't have water on certain days and because of his complicated conditions, but he could have Gatorade, and he would like look at me when someone's leaving. As far as he knows, there are like strangers coming in his room and he's in some strange place. God only knows what happens, but he's like, okay, my brother's there, my loved ones are there, fine. Maybe, I don't know what's going on inside of him. And he looks and he says, Gatorade, we can't just offer Anu some great Gatorade. And it's like, where is that kindness coming from? Usually the hospital folks said they've never seen a patient like that. Usually people get very angry, they get very reactive, but he was exceedingly kind. One after every small occasion, he never once complained about any of his conditions, and he had so many conditions in his body. I would never wish that kind of a thing on anyone. I'm not even sure how many would be able to survive it. But mentally, too, it just made me ask the question, what is compassion without conception? Because he couldn't conceive of compassion. It wasn't like, oh, I like the idea because I've read in a book that you should be kind. You should be compassionate because, if you are kind, I'm kind, we create a better world, and that's a good world. That's it. Those are all intellectual ideas. He couldn't have any of those inside of him. Yet he was being consistently and remarkably kind. And it just made me wonder, how deep is this metaverse, right? Like how deep does it go if it can go beyond thought in this way? And so the question that really helps me, and I think perhaps might help some of our framing in terms of bringing it to education as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about heart intelligence, but I really like this question, where am I? John Pendergrass is the person that has a very nice framework. He says, if you ask yourself, where am I? right now. Right? You're in one of these 4 spots. Right? He says the first one is that I am completely traumatized. I don't know where I am. I can't find my body. Right? The second one is I'm in my body. I'm here. Where is Nipun? This is Nipun. This is Anu, right? Then you go a little further and you say, well, actually, my body is in me. I'm identified with the ocean in which the waves are coming and going. So I'm the ocean, and in it, this expression of the waves named Nipun is here. And then there's a 4th stage where everything is in my body. Now, what's interesting about this framework is, in my sense, if you want to go from, so the 4 states are there, but the arrows, the 3 transition points, and it's not linear, right? It's not like one after another. But if you were to go from no ground to foreground, you can click next. It really invites us to reconnect with the me. Right? This is your personal well-being. If you find yourself and you say, where is Nipun? I'm here. I'm in my body. And you want to expand because that also is weak. That's not that resilient. You want to go from I'm in my body to the next one. Oh, okay. Well, let me talk about the reconnecting with the me. My slides got hacked. No, this is actually reconnecting with the me. I won't talk too much about it since we started a little late. Next slide. But reconnecting with the me isn't like, hey, I just want to feel good. It's actually holding all these different tensions together. So one example of that tension is between self-sacrifice and self-care. Should I do self-sacrifice? Do it for the greater good? There's many times that you should do that. But if you just do that, that's also greedy because then you're not taking care of yourself, right? So how do you find the balance? And if you can hit that sweet spot in the realm of me, what you get is your own inner voice. If you don't hit that sweet spot, in the name of inner voice, you just have ego voice. So the next thing, hopefully the battery doesn't run out because then I won't know what to say. We'll just go to Q&A then. The next thing, if I'm in my body and you want to get to, my body is in me, right? This is like, we are much more than just our bodies and our senses and our thoughts. You're going to reconnect with the we, and there's my animal photo. And to reconnect with the we, also, it requires us. It's not just like, okay, I love you, you love me, let's hug. It's actually a lot more nuanced than that. You have to balance all these things between inclusion and boundaries. Because if I try to be over-inclusive, it doesn't work. If I have too many boundaries, it doesn't work because that's just narrow. And so how do you strike the sweet spot? And if you strike the sweet spot, what you get to is what the Buddha called noble friendships. Right? This is not friendship between me and me. If you are in the me part of you and I'm in the me part of me, it's a very shallow connection. But if you are in the we part of you and I'm in the we part of me, then it's like you and all your relations, me and all my relations, really creates a deep kinship. And that's the we. And then the third part is that if my body is in me, if I already feel like the ocean in which I am just a wave, and then I say, how do I connect with this idea that everything is my body? And that's reconnecting not with the me and the we, but the us. And this is this also has an edge. It's not that simple. You have to balance how much is effort and how much is surrender. Because if you say, oh, it's all in the flow when you need to do effort, that doesn't work. If you're just effort, that also doesn't work. And I think when you hit this sweet spot, you arrive at emergence. So this is a nice photo. I like this photo. It's a photo of murmuration. Right? You guys have also done a few things around this. This is thousands of birds coming together in a snap of a finger to organize like this. No staff, right? No HR department, no McKinsey consultants. They come together because there's a need, and then they dissolve. The guy who took the photo didn't even realize he took the photo. How do they do that? How do they cooperate at scale? And you look at this photo, and I think it's because it's at the intersection, the me, we, and the us. It's at the intersection of the me, we, and the us. So you can't just ignore the me. You can't ignore the we. You can't just be like, oh, I'm transcendent in the Himalayas. I'm in the field of the us. Right? That also doesn't work. It's actually at the intersection of these three things that you have a beautiful coherence. But it's tricky to distinguish between the we and the us, because everyone thinks they have the murmuration, right? Like I have a slide, okay, this is one of my friends who has differing political beliefs sent this to me, but in fun. But I think you guys will get a kick out of it. I'm from America, so you can see this is a kind of murmuration too, right? That's what he said. And that's sort of a metaphor that, yeah, everyone thinks that they've got a murmuration. And why is your murmuration better than my murmuration? And what are the qualities, the distinction between we and the us? And I would say that one major distinction is that the field of us, if you're touching that field, it's regenerative, right? That it reignites. Why? Because it ignites heart intelligence. And that is a great metric. If I can get a murmuration with hatred, with othering, with division, it's not going to touch the field of the us. It's not going to ignite heart intelligence. And the heart intelligence is a very real thing. So you can say, well, what is heart intelligence? I'll give you a couple of these things and then we'll get to some Q&A after that. But what is heart intelligence, right? It's not like a Bollywood film and my heart feels so nice because I saw two people who love each other. Your me and my me came together and we feel secure now. And there is an emotion to that. But that is not the heart intelligence I am talking about, right? Heart intelligence I'm talking about is this notion. It has three dimensions, right? But the first dimension is personal coherence. I won't talk too much about it, but I'll give you two graphs. If I'm angry, this is what happens to my body, right? This is your heart rate variability. Your heart's going zzz, 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 like you are completely chaotic inside. And there is no choice for you but to be absent because you're just hijacked. Okay? And if we have appreciation, this is what your heart rate variability looks like, right? Extremely coherent on the inside. So you start with the personal, and then you go to the, I can skip this slide. Well, I don't know. Well, what's our time? There's no clock here, so I'm used to 10:45 for the whole session. Someone's saying take your time. He's saying 30. He looks like he's in the front row. So I'll share more stories later. Maybe we go to the next slide. We started a little late. So the second part is not just personal coherence, but social coherence. And what does that look like? Right? So if you look at our heartbeat, if we are in close proximity, your brain has registered my heartbeat right now. And my brain, vice versa, has done that. And if we're all in coherence, we all start to support each other's inner personal coherence. So 7 feet out, our heart's electromagnetic waves reach out. This is science. And if you're with people you trust and you like, even when you're doing physical things like climbing up these stairs, they don't feel as steep. But if you're with people you don't like, it feels a lot steeper. So there's a lot to unpack there. We can fast forward this one. And so many examples in the world of like bacteria to animals to nature. Next slide. But here's, this is worth taking like 2 seconds on. Vinoba, everybody would know, Gandhi's successor. But Vinoba did something absolutely stunning in human history. We have wars going on for decades and decades for small pieces of land. Vinoba came post-Gandhi in India, and he says, you're a rich landowner. He doesn't even say that. He starts and says, if you have 5 kids and you have all this land, what would you do when you die? He says, I would distribute it to 5 kids. Would you adopt me as your 6th son? Purely voluntarily, purely on the basis of his virtue, people said, they said, of course, it would be my honor to adopt you as my 6th son. And he says, I don't want 1/6 of your land even. Please give it to your brother or your sister in your community. On that basis alone, 5 million acres of land. That's almost as big as Israel. Like that's like three or 4 times the size of Palestine. Voluntarily in this country just a few decades ago. I even know people who spent their whole lives with Vinoba. Cover of Time magazine, it says, I have come here to loot you with love, openly. Right? I don't want to keep anything. I'm just here for your heart. It was the largest peaceful transfer of land. in the history of the world. And no one, I mean, it's like, who wants to sign up for that? Who wants to be a CEO of a company? Yeah, please sign me up. That's my dream. Who wants to do this? Well, that seems a little hard because it requires me to be doing some inner work and being a good person, being a person that a stranger says, yeah, of course, I want to adopt you as my son, right? The 7 feet electromagnetic wave. So next slide. And the last thing around it is planetary coherence, right? Not just social coherence, but you can actually get to far greater scales of this kind of coherence. And I won't talk too much about it, but that's there. So I think what, next slide.
You have time till 11:30.
Yeah.
So you have 40 minutes more.
Yeah, don't rush.
Yeah?
40 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
30 minutes done.
Yeah. He's like, I didn't say. Yeah, I mean, I could tell you a lot of stories, but yeah, okay. But it's nice also to do some Q&A. So Bucky Fuller had a beautiful quote. He says, don't just fight the old paradigm, right? Like, create a new paradigm and render the old one obsolete. What he's saying, in other words, like my translation of it is, hey, let's throw a better party, right? Like if you can regulate your nervous system, I can regulate my nervous system, and together we can help each other do that. And our electromagnetic waves are going 7 feet out, and that is rippling out into a giant murmuration of heart intelligence. I mean, that's a better party. Why are we not throwing that better party? And that's not utopian. Vinoba said, I on a voluntary basis, he did something no one else even dreamed or thought or could even imagine in today's world that you could do. And he did it, and we know it. Einstein said we wouldn't even remember, we wouldn't believe that a person like Gandhi in 500 years existed. But we know he did, at least our generation does, right? So how do we actually step into this space? And Gandhi said something very provocative. He said many things very provocative. But he says, we want systems to be so good. And this is very true with leaders. And I've sat with the who's who of the world's leaders, you know, and it's very seductive. Yeah, systems change. Because, you know, you are so powerful, you are rich, famous, powerful, you accumulated so much, let's create a system change. But Gandhi said we want our systems to be so good that we don't have to be. And we have now hit the limits of our systems change. No matter what system change you try to do, some other problem shows up in another part of the system because we have completely ignored this inner work. And Gandhi warned against this. He says, don't just go for outer. Of course, systems change is important. I mean, I've dedicated so much of my life to it. But without inner change, it is just going to be hollow. And what he's really saying is that typically we say outside systemic political change is where we start. Then we go in and we say, hey, let's have constructive implementation programs. And then you say, oh, inner change, good idea, right? But what Gandhi said was the opposite of this. What he said is start with inner change. That will lead into constructive social change. And that will then lead to systemic change. And so if we think from that direction, there was a climate activist. He says, look, what we're doing to the planet is a disaster. So he says, you know, can we, you know, let's go and get a whole bunch of people together. You got 1 million people together. A lot of people. Major world event, right? At some level. He comes back from it and he says, nothing's changed. He says, why not? Why did this one random guy in a loincloth like lifts a little bit of salt and history gets changed? And how come nothing happens when I get 1 million people together? He studied that and he wrote a book called Gandhi and Iceberg. And this is what he said, the thrust of it. Chris Moore Bachman, next slide. He said, everyone focuses on satyagraha, which is this resistance to the dominant paradigm. But he says that's actually not what Gandhi was doing. Iceberg, the thing with the iceberg is you only get to see what's on the top. 90% of the iceberg is below the surface. And what he was saying is if you look below the surface, what you actually see is self-purification. So all those people that started on the Dandi March for 15 years, they were living an ashram lifestyle with these very intense vows. And it was that allowed them and gave them this audacity to go and change history. Right. Next slide. And I think this is towards the end. I think what I want to say is ultimately that we design who we are. Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama. And you would think that when your enemy is China or not, he wouldn't call it enemy, but when someone was focused, he would need a lot of well-being classes, right? He would need a lot of classes on how not to burn out. Desmond Tutu, in the same way, working in intense situations. I'm assuming that everyone knows about them, so I won't say much more. But here they were towards the end of their lives. Desmond Tutu, of course, has passed away. But take a look at this. Is really, I think it's like a 1-minute video. Hopefully it plays. Well, it's playing, but hopefully we get sound. So let's see. It's worth the wait. It's one of my favorite videos. It's like, you guys have probably seen it. Yeah, I mean, how have you not? But it's like, it's one of those things you could watch 100 times and it would still be. It's basically both of them in great joy. Okay, well, maybe we. Okay, we could do Q&A and then see when these guys figure it out. Or we can watch it with subtitles. I don't know, but that's probably not. It's fun to watch it with the audio. Have you seen this love song? It's so good, man. It's just both of them laughing. Both of them are having an entirely different worldview. One is Christian, one is Buddhist, and they're both just like full of joy. And you're like, how can you have led such a tough life? Not taking any breaks, right? Not having any resources to do your spa days or whatever, you know, and what is their regeneration function? And, you know, Gandhi never took a break. And they were like, well, don't you get tired? He's like, tired from what? He's like, don't you want a vacation? He's like, I'm already on vacation. Like what? And that's like, there's a way of, oh, there it is. Okay, worth it. Okay, let's watch it. Anu, you'll like it.
Thank you. I consider that person also is a mischievous person. Unfortunately, that person is Christian. Unfortunately, he is a Buddhist.
It's the question of how you think about your own death. That possibility.
Quite polite. Well, he doesn't mind too much because there's the reincarnation.
Thanks. That's good.
And I'm wondering, what is it about your friendship with each other that allows you to have this kind of extraordinary joy?
He's always troubling me. I admire him enormously. Oh, he's going to get proud. I'm just saying, he is there for us as a beacon. So I really love, you see, always teasing me, and also I tease him. This is so we really become something quite special. Yes. So, and also his face. As you see, the head looks like a monk now. No? You see, this picture, a special picture, I think at the time of my death, I will remember you.
And Lobsang can tell you that for the Dalai Lama to say that I want to keep your face in my head is a very high compliment. He practices how to die 5 times a day. So how do we get from absence to presence to this kind of regeneration? I think we get there through heart intelligence. How do we retain that in a world that is optimized for absence, in an AI world that will solidify that even more? These are open questions, hard questions. So I don't have answers, but hopefully you do. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Nipun. I won't take away the time from these people, so I'll say whatever questions you have, please shoot. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah.
She's saying if you have any questions, raise your hand. If you don't, just smile, like the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. Yeah.
So you said that we need to strike a balance between inclusion and boundaries.
Yeah.
And I'm struggling with that.
I hold it.
Okay. So yeah, could you elaborate a little more? Because when I'm being inclusive, I want to kind of, just push the boundaries a little bit and be more inclusive.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really healthy situation that especially those of us who work in public service face, because you go into service because you're not interested in making a lot of money and doing a lot of stuff for your own self. So you kind of you already have an open heart, and that open heart's propensity is include the whole world, like bring it all in. Like, why should I be the bottleneck, but there's also some elements I've noticed in my own self, from my own experience, there's also some elements of greed in that. That I want to be as open as possible. Oh my God, I read about Gandhi's story. I want to be like Gandhi. He included everything. You try to include even your neighbor, and you're like burnt out in 2 days, and you say, well, why was I doing that? Why did I want to shortcut all the steps and just go, I read about idea of Gandhi and now I want to go do it, and it doesn't work like that. And so you have to have boundaries. And in fact, people say that those who are most compassionate are the ones that have clearest boundaries, because they're not trying to climb on conditions. As in some traditions, they say, if these are the conditions and this is all I can do, let me just do that. In Austria, I was with another big business leader, and they're talking about all this big stuff in the world, which is also really wonderful. But then we were having a meal, and he's like, when I was a teenager, I had this experience of this, deep connection with the universe. And I said, how did you respond to that? And he says, for years, I would just go and say, my job is to take care of the 2 feet around me. And it made me so happy to do that. So you can be inclusive in that way too. You can be inclusive with depth, not just always with breadth. You can be inclusive in a slow way, in a natural way, in an organic way that allows for conditions to ripen, and not like seek. And I have learned this through my own experience. I've never asked to speak anywhere. We've never pitched a story to the media. I've just never tried to do any of these things. And we've never fundraised in service space, never filled out any form, right, of fundraising. And you'd be like, well, if you do that, you're going to be irrelevant in 25 years, At least I'm relevant enough to be here today, right? So you would be amazed. It's an untested hypothesis that we have, that if we go slow and natural and 2 feet, that's like somehow very small. But we actually have a very confused idea of small and big. And so in that sense, it's not to say we shouldn't be inclusive. I'm all for, I could sit there and say, may the whole world be happy, and that would move me to tears. But at the same time, there's something about, healthy boundaries as well. So to be gentle, to not get ambition wrapped up in it, is helpful. It has been for me. Does that help?
Yeah. And would you say that inclusion then brings in its own challenges? Because in my experience, it has brought a lot of challenges for me.
Absolutely. The thing is, it's challenges in the beginning, challenges in the middle, challenges at the end. So the goal is not to get rid of challenges. So there is no way that inclusion will bring challenges, boundaries will bring challenges, a healthy balance will bring challenges. So the idea isn't to run away from challenges. It's like Martin Luther King Jr. had a very beautiful quote. He says, peace is not the absence of tension. It's your capacity to hold that tension with grace. Like a guitar string. Too loose, doesn't work, no music. Too tight, it pops. How do you hold the perfect tension? So that's inner work. And not just inner work, that's also collective inner work beyond a certain point. You can only go so far individually.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
So when we talk about inner work, collective or individual, what's a baby step we all can take that you think would get us off on that journey?
A science-backed baby step is spend 12 minutes in meditation every day. In 6 weeks, your brain changes. They've seen that. 12 minutes. We can afford that. You know, it doesn't matter if you're sitting in your car waiting for someplace, instead of taking out your phone and scrolling endlessly. I mean, I'm not saying you do that, but we all do. You know, people do that. They go take a break. This is so exhausting. Let me go to the bathroom and people have given TED Talks on this, so I'm not judging. Well, are you saying you have done that? No. No.
I want to ask. I do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really do. And the question is in terms of how do we bring that change in the corporate world? Maybe it starts with the self, but still, how do we get a movement in the corporate world created?
Yeah.
Which
The corporate world is so much of our world. So there's so many people are, you know, they're spending 40 hours a week in a shared setting. If you can plant some seeds in that kind of a context, it could have a tremendous ripple effect.
how?
Yeah, it's a good question. To me, I really like, in this regard, I really like the work of Adam Grant. He's a professor at Wharton, very well respected, now a celebrity of sorts. You know, he's been close to service space for a very long time before he became famous. But he wrote this book called Give and Take. And he says there are three kinds of people. He says, and I would qualify this and say, I would say three kinds of mindsets. Giver mindset, where you say, I'm thinking of the other first. Taker mindset, where I'm just thinking about me. How is this good for me? And a matcher mindset, where if you're a nice guy, I'll be nice to you. If you're not nice, I'll put a boundary. Right? So he shows consistently that if you can move the center of gravity, if you have a taker network where everyone's for their own promotion, everyone's like just me, you can succeed, but it'll be very brittle, right? And his research shows that if you can move the center of gravity of any small group or of an entire company, if your giver quotient is here, if you can move it a little bit more towards the giver side, productivity goes up, retention goes up, leadership goes up, the kinds of connections go up, and he has a lot of data around that. So I would say that I know there's a lot of mindfulness programs and things like that, but I think those don't go deep enough, because that's basically, part of it is just like a Band-Aid. It can feel like if a CEO comes and says, you should all meditate. It's if I'm frontline person, it would feel like, oh, well, you want to keep getting rich off of me and you just want me to meditate because of all your toxicity. So it can feel like a pacifier for the status quo. But if you can create something that's collective, where generosity is not individual. If I'm generous to Anu, it's like now you're implicated in all of that, even if it's anonymous. And there's a lot of science around how moving that center of gravity towards that can actually make a huge difference. And it's not just corporations. I mean, this is relevant everywhere, in any setting. In fact, nowadays, even in families, right? You bring extended families, they all have different polar political views, and it's like hard to, you know. So how do you be generous and say, okay, maybe that's a view I don't understand. How do I hold space for that? But that takes a generous heart, and we don't have places where we grow our generosity muscles. And science tells us that it's a muscle. Yeah. I should probably give briefer answers.
Nipun, I've had the privilege of following your journey for the last decade or so.
Was I bald when I started, and I'm still bald now?
Yes. And you shared a story the last time that we probably met about you and Guri. I would love for you to probably touch upon that. I think, what's kept you going, the work that you've been doing, your evolution from the first time that you kind of took a year-long break to walk in India, and now to where you are, the kind of ideas and the concepts that you're sharing are very counterintuitive to what we hear on a day-to-day basis, right? And so how are you cultivating heart intelligence, having done this for almost 3 decades or so?
To go back to my Austrian friend, Christian Felber, he said I take care of the 2 feet around me. In a way, I have tried to organize my life so that is not compromised. take care of the 2 feet around you. So metaphorically speaking, because if I build like 30 relationships where we are thinking of something way out there, that invariably will put me in a race condition between, do I do this or do I do that? So if your brother then gets really sick, you're not going to be like, cancel my whole life. 7 months, I'm moving in and I'll just, take care of very, very mundane things. You may want to, but you may not have the life conditions to do that. And in my case, you can say, well, I had the privilege of having the life conditions, but I don't think it was, I'm not in a position of traditional privilege. It's just that I organize my life with these kinds of organizing principles, which essentially lead with relationship over transaction. Like at its core, I don't transact. I don't come in and say, what can I get here? And when you do that, you give permission to other people to do that. I don't say, this is a rich person and this is a poor person. Let me give my fragrance to the rich person or poor. It's like, it doesn't matter. Both ways. I don't give my sympathy and say, oh, I wish you had more of this or that. It's that you have different kinds of wealth. I have different kinds of wealth. And in every moment, all of those wealths are changing. And when you look at it with such a broad, expansive mindset, then everything looks different. And then you give yourself permission to ignite your heart intelligence, and you give others the permission to meet you in that space. And when that happens, you realize, man, it's good for everyone. Not just me and you, but for emergence that happens between us. And when you keep doing that for a certain period of time, you're like, wow, like there was really something. This is a different way to create social change. And so I think it starts with leading less with transaction and more with relationship, which is multidimensional. Transactional is one-dimensional. When people say, what do you need? Tell me, good people, good-hearted people, whatever you need. I'm like, I don't know. How do I know what I need? I can give you what my ego tells me, but sometimes my ego will tell me all kinds of things, I know better than to trust it. So I would do it by committee. I'd be like, hey, you're my friend. What do you think I need? You're my friend. What do you think I need? And maybe you have it wrong too, but collectively we might get it right. Oh yeah. But we're almost out of time. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Are we? I don't know.
No, we have time.
Okay.
I feel very overwhelmed with you here, Nipun. I often get asked, like, what have I learned on the journey? How have I shifted? And I'm not exaggerating. I think every time I answer the question, the shifts that have been biggest for me have come from you. Shifting from big to small, shifting from outcome to journey, the belief in seeds. I'm so grateful. And my whole understanding and concept of what a leader can be has come from you. So I'm so grateful that you're here. I think for me, seeing that photograph of Viral with your parents was very, very, very beautiful. I was following that part of your journey. I think for many years I've learned so much from you, but I think through that time, reading Pavi's blogs and following your time in the hospital, I learned more than I ever had. And so I think my request is maybe to share a couple of stories from that time. Pavi, Viral, you. Yeah. I'm thinking of the chai story and maybe just to choose any other story that is emerging for you right now, because I think I've learned the most through your stories.
Thank you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for helping others lead with love. After 15 years in at this scale, very few people would, have a 15-year celebration. Yeah, there it is. So let's do that. Is that the TFI thing to do? I like it. I mean, it is hard once you scale to have the conditions to openly be like, look, we're talking about leading with love. And That's not, as Tashi yesterday said, that's not wishy-wishy or whatever. I loved her character because she was bringing in all those things and transformed by the end. Yeah, you know, there were so many amazing moments. And I feel grateful also for, you know, the ways in which you followed it and supported it and blessed it. Perhaps the most formative sort of moment, I don't know if this has anything to do with education, but I'll just say it. It's a human story, so I guess it does have something to do with education of the heart. It educated my heart in that moment. When, you know, I would go to the hospital, I have to stay awake all night. Every other night I was doing that. And you know, you're physically totally stretched. I mean, but what do you know, there's no real option in that situation. Not that I wanted even an option. My brother is one of my most incredible inspirations in life. We've never had a fight in our life, you know, to give you an idea of how close we are. We don't even need to talk to be close, right? Like, and that was beautiful because even if his brain's not there, I don't care. I feel like just as connected as ever. But in one of those moments, one of those weeks, he had 104-degree temperature, and for the whole week. And 104 is very dangerous for the body. And his body was extremely compromised. And so they're like, you got to bring it down. So they give him Tylenol and all these fever reducers, but you can only give so many a day. So he would max out. And so every 4 hours, his medicines would work for 2 hours, but then he's got 2 hours where we have to bring it down in some way or another. And the only way is ice. And, you know, I remember being there with him one night. I'm there with him. I'm there with him all the time. But one of those nights, now I have to he's shivering and his temperature is 104. They don't know the source of it. We don't know how long it's going to last. And I have to put ice on him. I mean, it's not like a fun thing to do, you know. I mean, I guess maybe there are doctors in the room who could do it. I'm not one of those guys, you know. I'd cry if I see a homeless person on the streets, and I've lived with them. So I have a sensitive heart in that way, and I have to put ice on my own brother. And it's like unending. We don't even know where this is going to go, all this stuff. And in the middle of this, you know, we're at 3 a.m. one night, I have to do this, and I can tell he's in a lot of pain, and we're sitting there, and you know, we have this special handshake that we've always done. He's going in and out of consciousness, and I'm holding his hand in mine, and I'm thinking, yeah, you know, what's my deepest prayer for him? And I realized that it wasn't that his suffering goes away. It was that he suffers well. And that if I had anything in me that could help him, may it be his, you know, that kind of a spirit. And in one of those moments, he opened his eyes, and, you know, I was there with him doing my ice thing and all that. And I asked him, I said, you know, Viral, you haven't complained once. Like, are you registering this pain? What's going on? You know, and I said, what do you do when all this pain hits? Like, what's your response? And I wanted to make sure that he's still aligned with what I know he's capable of. Not everyone is. I don't think I would be capable of it. Maybe, who knows? But I know he's capable of holding this deep center point in himself. And he looks at me, opens his eyes. 3 a.m. in this setting is like totally epic. And he looks and he's like, I just breathe into the pain. He didn't even say pain. He says, I just breathe into it. And that's such a great metaphor, right? Like, who in that state, I don't know. I can't imagine. I couldn't have imagined before this that somebody in that kind of pain would say consistently, pain without even an end, say, I just breathe into it. And man, what if we did that collectively? instead of escaping, instead of plotting schemes so I could be a little happier. And along the way, I have unintended consequences in the world. What if we just breathe into it? What is that inner work? And what does that do collectively between the two of us? And what does that give to the world? So we would have lots of such moments that were, very instructive for me. I felt very blessed. I still do. And I feel like he's right there with me. So it's a great way to deepen. I would have never guessed that I would get an internship like this in my life. I figured it would be with my parents or something when the time came. I don't know. But here it was. It's an intense year in some ways, but great joy. I still landed at joy. Like if I were to say that, you might be like, what the, this guy, like, what does he know? He's probably bypassing 20,000 things inside of him. But now I say it with confidence that, man, you can be in intense situations. You can suffer, you can cry, you can be in pain and still not lose the through line to joy. Still not like forget that, oh, those nurses, they're human beings too. And behind every door, there's so much pain. And why don't you give them a little chai? Why don't you make their day? And like, that's what I would do. That was my job. I was doing acts of kindness in the hospital. I mean, I was going crazy with it. I was like giving heart pins everywhere. And I was like, you can't take that out of me no matter what. Even if I'm in tears, I'm like, yeah, let me do a little act of kindness. And you're like, why can't we can all do that, So yeah, it's increased my faith in love and joy and in resilience that we can breathe into it. There you go. You can do this for me. Come on. Yeah, let's see it. Let's see it. Maybe one last question if we have one more, or we have a couple of them. Oh, we have 10 more. 2 questions. We could do both of those questions. I'll try to bring it back to education.
Okay, if you try to bring this question back to education, I'll be really impressed. My question's more, I think, on a personal level, being at a position where you can impact quite a few number of people, is how do you deal with being misunderstood? And specifically when the people or the community not getting what you're trying to do is an important piece in your life, or maybe it is a part of your being. So how does that work for you?
Yeah. I think that's part of leadership is, I'm amazed that we don't have too many insights into leadership as a practice for inner change, because it's actually a fantastic practice for inner change. Because you can do inner change individually, but if you try to do it collectively, it's really hard. Because you realize that, man, like everybody, if you go deep enough with any single person, you will realize how quickly you diverge. And you say, wow, like I don't truly look at the world exactly the way you do. I'm sure Shaheen and I, if we were to sit down and go deep down, we'd have differences, right? But I'm just using you as an example. But we would, I'm sure, right? That's just how it is. I mean, anyone who's married could tell you that, yeah, we went deep enough and then we discovered we were 2 different people. And then they'll tell you that, oh, not just that, then we're growing differently too. So if we work together for 10 years, if we've been in the same village for 5 years, and we're like, oh, but I was a different person 5 years ago and you were a different person. And how in the world do you keep all of this together with a through line to that field of us? It's hard. What helps me is to realize if I am misunderstood by somebody or if somebody judges me, and my whole life, like for instance, in my case, nobody really thought I was doing anything significant. They're like, nice guy, but this is like, you're running a lemonade stand, that my children know how to run. But this is not serious, right? They would be like, what do you do? I would be like, I volunteer. And they're like, okay, fine. Yeah, this is whatever. This is not significant. This is a cute guy, right? or maybe not a cute guy. She's like, you're not that cute. And what has helped me that's one example, but in some cases it can be very charged as well. People don't like the decisions you make, right? And when you make it in a collective setting, you have 10,000 views around it. What has helped me is to realize that you can oppose an action but love the person. That you don't have to be a vegetable to be inclusive, but for your capacity to oppose the action but love the person is directly proportional to how much ownership you take of your actions. So if I am sitting there saying, I did this, I created this, I have this much power, I have to be responsible and create this change in the world, if there's a lot of I in there, you have clubbed the action and the person. And when you have clubbed the action and the person in you, you will project that onto other people. And when you project that onto other people, when they say something bad to you, you'll be like, you said that bad to me. Actually, they didn't say it. It was a mind state that arose in them in that moment. They might feel very differently 10 minutes later or 10 years later. But it was just a mind state that arose, and there are millions of mind states that are constantly arising and passing all the time. But you couldn't identify with the mind state and instead love the person because in your own self you haven't done that work. Because you think you did the actions. Well, congratulations then. You have just reduced the we-to-we potential into a very cheap me-to-me community. And that's no good. So the practice for that is that when someone misunderstands you, you're like, why is this person doing this? And they might be in a very confused state even. You have to hold that. But how do you hold that? You hold that by remembering, oh, this is just a thought. Now, it may be a thought that lingers, right? They may give you a lot of trouble for a long period of time. But still, your practice is, this is a thought. This is not who you really are. And the more you do that on the outside, the more you're saying that to yourself. And if you do that kind of light leadership work for 5 years, you will be lighter. And as you are lighter, you'll be able to hold a lot more. And as you can hold a lot more, you'll have far greater impact without you even trying. So leadership, in a very real way, is a practice. So many examples I could give you. I'm sure you have so many as well. I don't think I brought it back to education, but I tried.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe one last on that side.
Now, I'm still reframing, but I'll still tell what I'm thinking. So you told about in order to go from absence to presence, we need to work on inner and then we have to work on the collective inner work. I was wondering that how should we do that? How should I as a person take responsibility for the collective inner work? What should that action be? And second, again, wanting to understand from an education perspective as well, where the problem is also very complex, where there are multiple layers involved, and it is not just, it is like people don't have food, let's say, to eat, or other problems to live and everything. How do you empathize with that, and then how do you deal with that to actually solve the problem? Because ultimately we want to solve for it as well. Okay, we are good people and we want to do all of that, but how do you still really eradicate and be a society where everyone is really educated? So how do you really bring that? Is it that once you transform everyone individually and collectively, will that also get solved? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think the crux of your question is, hey, there's so many problems in the world. We're all coming together as people who are called to service. We want to solve these problems, right? But along the way, we cannot forget about solving. We cannot become a problem for others to solve. And no one wants to think that, right? They're like, man, I create 10,000 jobs in the world, right? Yeah, and okay, I may be a problem for my wife, but one person and 10,000 jobs on this side, right? We all have these analyses in our minds, and we never want to look inside and say that if I get angry with one person in one way, how maybe that's justified for the greater good. And we are always taking these shortcuts. So there is this edge that between external impact and inner transformation? And how do you prioritize that? Do you go at the pace of your lowest common denominator or the highest common denominator? If you're optimized for in a group, right? Let's say there's 5 of us, and if we're optimized for external impact, we will always try to go for the highest common denominator. It's like, yeah, you're problematic in 10 ways, but you're a really good writer. You're problematic in 20 other ways, but you're really good at marketing. You're problematic in other ways. And we have systems that allow us to manage this in this way. But what was really interesting about, say, people like Gandhi and Vinoba and voluntary movements around the world is that when we are volunteering, I'm not going to put up with any of your stuff, because if I don't like it, I leave, right? But then if I say you can't leave because then you won't be able to buy bananas at the store because I'm giving you a salary, you are basically coercing that situation. And when you coerce it, you move a lot of these things below the carpet, right? And so underneath it, you have to really start to ask the question of, how do you lead? There's nothing wrong with like paying people for their bananas, right? That's fine. But how do you lead with inner transformation and not just have it be about external impact? Because if it's about external impact, lots of people, far greater than you and I, have been doing external impact for millennia. And one can argue we're better off than ever before, but one can also argue that we're in pretty bad shape, that it's not a world that's working for a lot of people. And if it's not, is the best way for 5 of us to come together and scheme something that no one else has done because we're so innovative? Or is the harder approach to actually dissolve our ego, fall into a greater field of we, and allow a collective emergence to flow through? And if you look at people like Gandhi, he was very clear. He didn't strategize. He didn't, like 3 days before the Dandi March, you think he's sitting there with a think tank, with a whole group of think tankers and saying, what are we going to do? Tagore asked him explicitly. He says, the whole country's looking at you. What are you going to do? Now, Gandhi was in an extremely privileged position of creating external impact. And Tagore is asking, what are we going to do? The whole country is looking at you. And Gandhi says, I don't know, but you can be sure that I'm praying. This is the ground that we are walking on. If you and I have any opportunity to create external impact, in large part, it is because of gratitude for people who created this field of inner transformation. So how do you lead a country? How do you lead a movement? How do you shape the history books? How do you pave a way for nonviolence that no one even thought was possible? That Einstein says 500 years, I don't even know that we will believe such a man existed. How do you do that without a think tank? How do you do that while leading with inner transformation? Doesn't mean he didn't have strategies. Doesn't mean he didn't have organizing. He was an amazing organizer. He was an amazing strategist. He was an amazing marketing person. But he did all that without leading with that. He led with inner transformation. So what does that mean? As an alternate inquiry, it will take you down a very different track in life. So I hope all of you can, keep asking these uncommon questions. I mean, these are hard questions. You can't copy paste any of this stuff. It'll look very different in the Himalayas. It'll look very different in Bombay. It'll look very different in the Silicon Valley. It might look very different in let's say you're in a village. It'll look very different there. But how will you find it? By tuning in. Thank you, Anu. I tried to stay away from AI.
Good, good. You really touch the hearts of people, and I'm sure they're reflecting on how to change from within before we try to bring change for the outside world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anu.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Give a person next to you a hug and carry the ripples out into the world. Thank you so much.
To hug, so I have to do it again. Don't forget, you have to follow.